Welcome back to another episode of the Roundtable Discussion. Today's topic is going to be everybody's favorite conversation point, our newest Liberal leader.
And Prime Minister.
Well, by technicality, yeah, we have to call him Prime Minister now. I'm back with Cullen, and I'm Kevin, and today's topic, well, what do we think the country's future is going to look like with Mark Carney at the helm, of course, in the interim before the election, and then what Carney's chances of succeeding in the election are, and what that future looks like? I think I'll put it over to you for opening statements. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's quite a question. It's quite a big topic because one thing that I will kind of start by saying, I found it interesting how even before the Liberal leadership race had concluded and the final vote was, the Conservatives were already running anti-Carney campaigns. I don't recall seeing anything against Freeland. They were certain from the get-go that Mark Carney was going to be the one to succeed Trudeau. So they were already jumping the gun saying, this Carney fella, he ain't it. Carbon tax Carney.
Carbon tax Carney.
So they already were anticipating this for a while, it seems. But I have a lot of notes here. So, I mean, it depends. I mean, we can just jump right in if you want to jump right in.
Well, you've already brought up one point that I can comment on, the carbon tax Carney name. If you look at Carney's position, he's already come out with plans to, replace the carbon tax with something completely different. He wants to put subsidies on green technologies and do away with the carbon tax. So, do the Conservatives have to eat crow now for calling him carbon tax Carney if his public policy statement says that he's not going to implement the carbon tax? How can you still call him? It's almost like schoolyard bullying, 100% right?
Is. Politics has always been like that to a certain degree, but I think, and we can talk, and I'll be talking about this specifically coming up, but in the age of this populism wave in the last 10 years, identity politics and being emotional, being invested in this, that has things like carbon tax Carney, and again, a lot of, you could say, Trumpisms, that has seeped across Europe and North America.
And you bring up what might be the downfall of the Conservative Party is if they are seen just looking like, they don't have to do the same things. They just have to look like them. If you look like Trump when you get in front of a camera, people are going to treat you like it. Yeah, the red flags are going to go off and people aren't going to like you. You're already behind the eight ball as soon as you have any mannerisms or any policies or anything that aligns with Trump. So everybody is trying to distance themselves as far away from Trump as they can, or at least the smart people, politicians are. And, when they attack their opponent, like you just said, the Conservatives ignored Christia and went straight on Carney, name-calling. Politics is a lot of name-calling, but Canada, you may not remember, actually used to have a reputation of very civil political discourse. I don't know if you remember those days.
A few days ago, I wasn't around. Let's put it like that. I was not around at all. I was born when, oh gosh. Okay, I don't know when officially the election was in that. Sorry, I think Paul Martin was the prime minister.
Paul Martin, yeah.
It was either Paul Martin or right before Jean Chrétien resigned. That's when I was born. So, but that being said, a few days ago, I actually, in a bit of preparation for researching my notes here and everything I have, I like to watch some past political debates, particularly because if you look at how political debates have shaped up between the mid-2010s to now, it's again very populist. There's a lot of this.
Yeah.
There's of course social media makes it a lot worse. But I was rewatching the 1980 federal election, I think, but between Joe Clark and Pierre Trudeau.
Wow.
It is.
What was the view count on that video?
No idea. Probably I think in the thousands, 100,000s.
I was thinking one. Thought you were it.
That is but that is a valid point to say because it was so civil. It was
Yeah.
boring. But
Yeah.
at the same time, because I am not a fan whatsoever of this very populist, Trump-like debates and politics. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. So even though it was, you could say, boring, it was civil, and I enjoyed it way more because there was actually more civil, actual policy to discussion. Even if back then, if Pierre Trudeau and Joe Clark just hated each other's guts, they would still have that debate, and it came across as that, and it was just very.
I think you hit the head on the nail.
I hit the head on the nail.
You hit the head on the nail. I think you hit it right on the nail because you've basically you've outlined why we as a country, and I think this is a fair statement to make, why we as a country have such hatred is too strong of a word, but such a disdain for Trump-style politics is because we're not used to it. We don't do that in Canada. Yep. And when we switched over to it, as Pierre Poilievre has decided to do, or his team, as that switch, because it was a gradual Canadian politics switch, and as we moved more and more in that direction, Canada saw ourselves becoming like the States, and that is not a good look for Canada either. We do need to have our reputation intact. I like that I can travel anywhere in the world, and somebody will see a Canadian flag find out.
You go to the United Kingdom, if you're wearing a Canadian flag, they'll love you there.
And if there's anything worth protecting about Canada, that is,
reputation.
I think that's the most important thing, is that other countries accept us with good feeling, good warm feelings, and that's something that we need to defend. Yep. We need to defend our reputation, and we need to not be the bully that the Americans are typically blamed for being, whether or not Trump is in office. They've always had a bullying.
America has had a bit of a contentious reputation abroad for a long time, but in
foreign policy.
Well,
yeah,
Korea,
exactly.
Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq,
yeah.
Trump, but particularly in the last 2 months, it's just gotten worse and worse for the States. But anywho,
well, it works. That's the reason why Canada is toying with this idea of using populism, because it's very effective.
Yeah, it is extremely effective, and it's certainly, of course, I'm young. I haven't seen a whole lot of politics in the past, but I think even then I can still be a kid and remembering seeing. Even when guys like Stephen Harper, they weren't too popular, you weren't seeing F Harper signs everywhere. You just didn't see that. But now, best believe, sorry, not F Harper specifically, but you see that with the F Trudeau flags, the whole thing of woke politics, woke agendas, climate, and this and that and the other thing. And
I think political controversies existed back then, and I'm sure there were many people that had the F Harper thought in their mind, but there's no social media, so they couldn't. There
was a little more of a social. I'm kind of struggling with the word. More of a social responsibility to okay, listen. We can disagree about politics, or I may not like this politician, but when I'm in public, I'm going to conduct myself like an adult.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that I think honestly has been eroded in the last 10 years or so, but definitely in the last 5. Ever since COVID. COVID really was something that populist movements and governments or oppositions, they just took with it and just they ran with it.
Yeah, and the reason I used to like, I shouldn't say used to like Canada, but used to appreciate our political system more than I do today, is because the hero always holds themselves to a higher standard. And that's what I saw when I was a kid. You saw what the Americans were doing on TV, and then you saw what the Canadian politicians were doing on TV, and you could see the difference. And it was very easy as a child to go, I get what we are. We're the holding ourselves to a higher standard crowd, which gives you a good warm feeling. And it also gets you the feeling of when you watch the American politicians on TV, you're like, thank God we're not there.
But now
we're there.
In the last 10 years, we're just seeing this.
The Canadian politicians brought
and more and more. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever.
I like old, boring politics. That's just like you said.
Honestly,
it's a better
you might
show.
think boring. Yeah, like you might think it's boring, but let's be honest. We prefer boring in politics when politics is not the number one discussion at the dinner table at Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Yep.
It's better for all parties involved.
Yeah.
But and I'm proud to be Canadian. I love this country and I love the privileges that we have and the reputation we have as a country, but I don't want to see it keep going down this road. So this kind of, I think, really segues into now we're going to have this conversation about Mark Carney, and I have a lot of notes, so I kind of wanted to push the train a little bit. So in case, a very, very brief description of Mark Carney. This is stuff you've probably seen in the news like a million times, but why don't we just refresh everyone?
I think instead of carbon tax Carney, we should rename him
to
Captain Carney.
It rolls. It's like Captain Crunch.
Exactly.
And it rolls off the tongue, and it's more friendly.
And Canada's still floating, but there's a lot of icebergs out there. So, what are we going to do about it? And now we get to see he doesn't have as much time as he'd like, but if he's successful in the election, he's going to have a great deal of time.
Exactly. So a quick description, let's say. So Mark Carney, born March 16th, 1965 in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories.
Nice.
That's interesting. I don't know if we've ever had a prime minister that has come from the territory specifically.
Yeah.
I have not looked, so don't fact check me, but I think it's the first one.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
He studied economics at Harvard University and the University of Oxford. So
Loser.
Okay. But the one thing I will give to him is it's not easy to get into Harvard and Oxford. That's not easy.
I'll take your word for it, but
that being said, he has a career in banking, of course. He became the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada in 2003, then became the official governor in 2008. And he was appointed governor of the Bank of England in 2013. And he was the first non-British person to hold that role. And I'm pretty sure the Bank of England was formed in the 1600s. So he broke the mold in quite a way.
Do you later in your notes talk about what Britain's relationship with him is or was?
I didn't go down that road, but I should have. But
we should probably go down that road a little later on.
Okay. So he stepped down as the Bank of England governor in 2020 and then worked with the United Nations and a special envoy with climate action and finance. And then he also served as an informal advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during COVID-19. So again, this is something that the news has said, every leader has said, and of course he's the outsider. But one thing I will point out, though, despite his very accomplished background and how he's been thrust into the public spotlight this year and is now our prime minister, even though he's not officially elected, he's our prime minister. A poll that was done by Abacus Data, okay, from July 2024, they held out. They had these pictures of major Liberal candidates who could take Justin Trudeau's job, but the poll question was, do you know who this picture is of? Okay,
yeah. Name this person.
Name this person.
Yeah.
7% were able to name Mark Carney. Yeah. Only 7%. 93% couldn't even attach a name to his face.
Yeah, I believe it.
So that's pretty. So I find that just pretty interesting that in July, of course, there were calls for Trudeau to step down back then, but of course he was still prime minister. But even just far less than a year, or about half a year, after that he's our prime minister, or he's now in the running. And just for context, the two most well-known people were Chrystia Freeland at 61%. So
nice.
People know her. And our favorite Melanie Joly at 20%.
Melanie, it's not too late. You can still get in the race. Kick him out.
We're team Melanie Joly here.
Yep. Team Melanie Joly.
Team Melanie. So
Queen Jolie.
Queen Jolie. There you go.
Queen Jolie. That's a nice name. I like that.
Sounds very fancy.
Yeah.
So, so that's background. So basically, now this kind of goes into my notes of now Carney's proposals, if we want to talk about that, or unless you have anything else to add in kind of our general introduction of Carney.
No, that was a great introduction. You covered a lot of bases. I'm glad you covered that he had spent time in Britain, and we should investigate that a little bit because he had a very controversial opinion on Brexit. So,
yeah, and it'd be interesting just to see if it was because of because I have no idea exactly why.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it has something to do with political affiliation, because he's, he is a part of the Liberal Party. They're somewhat equivalent to that in the UK is the Labour Party. They both start with an L and they're in red, just as a context. But the Conservative government was in power for a long time, and they were the ones who were championing and wanting Brexit. So I wonder if maybe that was where the contention lied. Who knows?
Well, yeah, he was surprisingly, well, we should fact check this, of course, but the initial results of my research was that he was pro-Brexit. And yeah, we should definitely fact check that, because I would hate to say something that I'm not remembering correctly.
We don't want to be like a certain person down south.
No, definitely not. And so the surprising part of that was that, like you say, it was a conservative talking point to be pro-Brexit. So it made it a little bit questioning in my head that this new liberal feller has a conservative viewpoint.
I'm not really getting a decisive answer of whether or not he was for or against it, but he came up with the opinion saying that Carney apparently warned many times that Brexit was expected to negatively influence the UK economy. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if he's saying that, I don't think he's personally saying I don't like Brexit, or if he's just saying this could potentially be negative.
Yeah, and I read it as, if you're going to do Brexit, you'd be better off with me as your governor of your Bank of England to, get us through the the economic turmoil of, breaking apart a trade agreement, basically, is what they were doing.
Sure.
And I think that Britain may have not been so eager to implement Brexit had Carney not been at the reins of keeping the money flowing, because every problem can be reduced down to, does the money increase or does it decrease? And so he steered a conservative government through a economically tumultuous period, and then moved to Canada and became a liberal.
What a career path. With briefly working in the United Nations sprinkled in there as well. But okay, so I say let's now transition into talking about his proposals. So, and we'll get into this, because I basically, to kind of spoil it, I have a little section here talking about some, depending on who you are, what you believe and how you look at it, some assets and some weaknesses about Mark Carney.
Well, this will be good.
And one of the weaknesses I'll kind of spoil is saying, well, assets / weaknesses could be, he was an advisor to Trudeau. He's an outsider, but he has ties to Trudeau. So that being said, going into the proposals, I think it's easy for a lot of people who still do not want to vote for Carney or the Liberals in this next election would be, he's the exact same. He's like, meet the new boss, same as the old boss type thing.
The old boss. Morale, beatings will continue until morale improves.
Exactly. So I went, because he has an official website where he has his proposals, and it seems that it's very heavily focused so far. All of his proposals are very on the economic side, which makes sense because he's the banker guy, and he's had criticisms of Trudeau mainly on the economic front. Yeah. So it makes sense that his proposals are very economy focused, and all of these notes here, word for word, I ripped straight from his website. So nice. I'm not twisting words here. If you have a problem with it, this is exactly what the website is.
If you say something that's wrong, it's Carney's fault.
Exactly. So I don't think I'll go through every last note, because it's not big paragraphs, but it's lots of
and we only have 6 hours. No, I'm kidding.
No, exactly. So I'll kind of maybe just bullet point or paraphrase some areas. But his first proposal and the big title is a Canada where anyone can work anywhere. Many Canadians have earned valuable qualifications, from healthcare credentials for nurses and doctors to trucking licenses, industry certifications, and Red Seal trades. Despite progress in recent decades, it is still too often the case that Canadians need to requalify if they move to a different province. This reduces opportunities and costs time and money. Our government is committed to collaborating with the provinces to ensure that qualifications in one part of our country apply to all, ensuring that anyone can work anywhere in Canada. By promoting labor mobility, we will improve competitiveness, lower costs, and spur economic growth, benefiting Canadian businesses, workers, and consumers.
Well, I like that idea, actually. Transferring red seals and professional certifications is a bit of a sticking point for the trades, and it shouldn't be too hard to solve that problem because everybody at least is in. We're all located in the same country. We should get along. The reason I'm surprised that he's put it given such high prominence to it in his website is because he has a anti-liberal viewpoint on immigration. And in fact, he actually wants to reduce immigration to I think it's pre-COVID levels or 2019 levels. I forget what his target was, but his target is significantly lower than Trudeau's targets. And so that's a difference between him and the previous Liberal Party. I don't know if that's a rift between the Liberals and Carney, or if the Liberals were seeking that and Trudeau was preventing it. We don't know what's going on inside the Liberal Party, but it is a disconnect between him and the previous Liberal position. He is not for increasing immigration targets. Now, how his professional certification program applies, because the immigration question is meant to solve the problem of, say, not having enough doctors. Solution: find a foreign trained doctor, bring them here, give them the required, if there's some top-up training that is required, and then off they go to practice law. And I'm sure provincial professionals have to undergo a similar type of process. You move provinces, you take the gap training, I believe it's called. You take your gap training and away you go. Now, if Mark Carney says he can eliminate the gap training by having everybody encompassed under one umbrella of certification, he's correct. That's a great program, not only domestically, but also internationally, because it might simplify the process for foreign workers to come into Canada and take up professional positions. So it's a great position. It talks about domestic and international issues. I'm just curious how it's going to flesh out when it comes head-to-head with his immigration policy. Because if he's trying to decrease numbers but bring in foreign professionals, there's a disconnect there. So I'm curious how that's going to resolve.
Maybe he'll try and transition it into where it's, whether it's a majority of it, a vast majority, or completely, it's high-skilled foreign workers.
Yeah.
Because if he wants to do that, then I think he probably could afford to reduce it, but still manage to maintain or bring in things like, or bring people like doctors and whatnot.
Yeah, so he's going to have to lower his unskilled immigration in order to leave room for his skilled immigration. But he doesn't talk about the immigration part of that.
Right. So, second point.
Yep.
A Canada where businesses can sell their products anywhere. A bottle of wine from British Columbia, lumber from Nova Scotia, and energy from Alberta should be available for sale anywhere in Canada. Too often, however, international trade barriers segment our market into 13 separate economies, driving up costs and reducing choices for consumers. Our government will reduce red tape and find solutions to improve the movement of goods and services across the country. Currently, efforts to address these challenges are fragmented across multiple federal bodies that lack focus, coordination, and clear accountability.
Well, that's another interesting policy because, but you read that international pressure is creating 13 economies. Is that how you read it? International something makes 13.
Too often, however, international trade barriers segment our market into 13 separate economies.
Right, and I don't know if I agree with that because I believe interprovincial trade restrictions create the 13 economies, right? Because if you try to bring a truckload of cigarettes from Ontario, you're going to jail. Like, it's illegal. You can't. You have to pay the Ontario duty, and then they even give you a sticker: duty paid And if you fill up a tractor trailer full of Ontario cigarettes and drive them to Manitoba, the RCMP will meet you at the border and escort you directly to jail, because the Manitoba duty hasn't been paid on those cigarettes, so you can't sell them here. There's a lot of different interprovincial trade barriers that obviously we couldn't possibly know about, and we don't have the time to discuss here. But obviously Mark Carney is addressing that concern that we do have some, Alberta moving oil to East Coast refineries. They can't do it. First of all, there's no pipeline.
Yeah, that's true.
And second of all, Quebec will vote it down. It doesn't matter how you want to get your oil to the East Coast. Quebec's in the way, and they say no. So if he's suggesting that he's going to find action on these items, that's a massive pipeline to the East Coast from Alberta. It's a country-changing style of decision, and I'm really curious if he's going to, if this is a hint,
including that,
yeah,
right.
if this is a hint of what his future plans are about regarding pipelines. Maybe a pipeline to the West Coast to ship to China. That's been on the table for a long time, and I don't know where it is right now, current status. I didn't prepare to talk about it, but I know it's been a contentious issue. Getting oil west and getting oil east for the longest time, we've bantered and argued about it, and I think maybe Mark Carney's got a solution.
Can Mark Carney build a pipeline that just transmits chocolate cake to my house?
If you get enough people to vote for it, anything's possible.
Chocolate cake coming to Brandon. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. But we'll bring it to you with drones. How's that? Is that better?
That'd be cool.
Yeah,
a drone skyline.
Cake, birthday cake by drone.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah,
that's the future.
You set up the party out in the backyard and you just wait. All the kids stare up. Yeah. And then the cable breaks and the cake lands and smashes everybody, and all the adults laugh because we were in on it the whole time. They fell for it again.
Exactly. These are great ideas.
Just think of the pictures. A bunch of people, kids with...
Yeah, like, they're like crying, and like the adults are just,
click, click, click.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, no one's going to invite me to a birthday party ever.
Never again. Never again. Number 3. A Canada that builds cross-border infrastructure and new trade corridors. Building and modernizing Canada's cross-border infrastructure will reduce costs, speed up the movement of goods, and strengthen our national connectivity. By ramping up the construction and upgrading of our transportation networks, we will boost productivity and competitiveness, saving tens of billions of dollars for Canadian businesses and consumers. These strategic investments will create jobs, stimulate regional growth, and ensure all Canadians benefit from a more efficient and unified market.
All right. I'm going to ask you, this is going to be a strange request, because I'm going to ask you to read it again from the beginning and get ready for me to interrupt you, because I want you to get to the part that I want to talk about, and then I'll say, okay, that's where I want to talk.
Okay, so you want me to read that again?
Yeah, just from the start.
Building and modernizing Canada's cross-border infrastructure will reduce costs, speed up the movement of goods, and strengthen our national connectivity.
Perfect. Okay, we can stop there. The first line, building cross-border infrastructure, is that?
Cross-border infrastructure.
Cross-border infrastructure. Okay, let's try to figure out what he's talking about. Because when I hear cross-border infrastructure, I hear tractor trailers and roads. That's what keeps things moving.
It does mention, I will say he does kind of have some bullet points here saying outdated highways, rail networks, ports, and transit points force businesses to absorb high trade cost, detracting from Canadian productivity and economic competitiveness.
So we're talking about building highways and railways.
Supposedly.
All right. If that is actually true, if we're talking about building highways and railroads, it sounds, on the face of it, it sounds like a good thing, because we also need railroads to the north. We need railroads to Churchill. We need a lot of rail. Alberta moves a lot of their product by rail. Farmers depend on rail. So money into the rail industry, I got to say, if it's good for the farmers, it's good for me. So that's another positive initiative on the Carney front. I trade the trade is the lifeblood of the country, and the highways and railways are basically like the arteries, right? So yeah, I'm 100% on board with this policy.
And farmers are just the backbone of any country. Yeah. So yeah. Number 4, and I think this is the final one. Yep. Fourth and final, a Canada that builds big projects.
Oh.
So
like
long project approval timelines in Canada create significant investment uncertainty, hindering the rapid response needed to address global economic changes. Project approvals can take between 3 to 10 years and even longer for complex projects. Current approval timelines for major products create delays that hamper economic growth and undermine investor confidence. Critical infrastructure such as ports, railways, and energy projects deserve expedited treatment to ensure Canada remains competitive and responsive to global market shifts. For example, after years of discussion without implementation, decisive action on decarbonization in the oil sands through carbon capture, utilization, and storage is long overdue.
Oh, so we've touched on a couple of really big points there. It sounded a bit repetitious when he mentioned railways and highways. It sounded like he was reusing one point and making 2 talking points out of it. But then you saved it because you brought up harbors, I believe, ports, right? And then you brought up tar sands.
Yeah, like energy projects that deserve expedited treatment.
Okay, so we can get away with highways. We can get away from highways and railways. Ports. The Vancouver port has been undergoing massive construction for as long as I can remember. Like every time you take the ferry, you have to drive past basically an industrial city. You have to drive through an industrial city to get to your ferry, and you see all of the industrial construction that's going on to prepare to improve Vancouver's port status. And we do need a way to move product from Alberta. So that if that requires building a new port, then so be it, right? Whatever it takes to keep the economy flowing. Literally flowing out of Alberta. It can only mean positive things for Canada. Now, the tar sands, there's, like that's another podcast.
A touchy subject.
That's a whole podcast all on its own. To say that he's going to take the carbon out of tar sands?
Yeah, decarbonization.
Decarbonize.
And carbon capture.
Yeah, like here's some decarbonized carbon. Like, is that... Yeah, well, that's what it's. There's nothing there. How can I sell you carbon that's been decarbonized? It's like de-alcoholized beer. You know, is it really?
But there's still 0.5% of it.
I know, but even still.
So that's almost like what it could be.
So I think what we're doing here is we're pointing out where his policies have sound footing and where they might be into wishy-washy. And I think when we start talking about how we're going to remove the carbon from the carbon, it gets a little silly. So I'm thinking he's probably saying things that environmentalists want to hear, but you know, manipulating the words so that he's not really promising much, but he's using all of the right words. And if you reread that paragraph, I'm curious if you kind of think that it's leaning that way as well.
Yeah, it sounds nice. It's so
exactly.
We're gonna make the oil sands sound nice, but
we'll make them pretty again. We're gonna plant flowers.
Yeah, so you've got like these massive ditches, this just rank smell of
but the hedging
crude
is
oil
amazing.
in the air.
And
but we have this great landscaping just off over there. Well, we have all this
ornamentals. I love.
We have this crude oil and all this fire right over here, but we have these lovely hedges just about 300 yards away.
Look behind the curtain.
Pretty much. So, to kind of, I guess, recap those 4 points. So, there's a lot of stuff in there that sounds promising. There's stuff in there that you can go cool, but like any political policy, there's some parts that are okay. That's wishy-washy. There's maybe some vagueness in it. So overall, I think it's not bad.
No, there's
something promising there.
Yes, and we know it's not all bad because the last guy was way worse. So this is a definite step in the right direction.
Sure.
Now, and chose that word specifically. It's a step in the right direction, two fronts. We're moving from left to right with Mark Carney. We have abandoned some liberal positions, immigration we've already discussed, but there's also a couple other things that Mark Carney has abandoned the liberal positions on, and I'm surprised that your research didn't turn that up. But I suspect it's because they aren't liberal positions that they're not being listed as his pluses, right? If you're leaning, if you have right-wing ideas, your left-wing party isn't going to talk about those. So I think that's why they got dropped. But anyways, Mark Carney wants to scrap capital gains tax. Not scrap it, but not have the increase that that was being threatened earlier. Capital gains tax hikes were on the table. Now, according to Carney, they're off the table. So that's a right talking point and definitely not something the Liberals
I wonder if
are going to mention.
I guess maybe it depends on who you ask. Some people might say that it's complete hocus pocus, but I think there's an argument to make that under Trudeau, the Liberals shifted more left because they've always been a center party.
Yes.
He's kind of bumped them.
Yeah, he's
just
trying to bring them back
a little bit to the left here. I wonder if some of these things by Mark Carney are, again, like you say, drag it a little back to the center, because then that can eat up swing voters. And there could be some people that might be, centrist, maybe slightly center right, that maybe they're not solely sold on the Conservatives or Poilievre, but they didn't want to vote for Trudeau. But maybe some of these more rightish or center ideas could wrangle some people back in.
Yeah, that's a probably exact strategy that they were thinking. The interesting thing was when you look at the numbers, the election results, how many votes everybody got, it's resounding. That message is or that idea is hitting home in the Liberal base, because
85%.
85%. It was 10-1 practically. Votes for Carney, votes for Chrystia Freeland, practically 10-1.
It was not even close.
Landslide. Now, when you pair that Carney brings some right-wing ideas to the table, and then you pair that with the Liberal base's voting results, the Liberal base sounds like they want a Conservative in charge. Now, that's an exaggeration, of course. What I'm saying is the Liberal base looked at a guy with a lot of right-wing ideas and said yes, and said it overwhelmingly. Yep. So that's something to consider if you're a true Liberal. Where do you sit in the Carney-Freeland position? If you're a Carney supporter, it means you probably like a more right-wing style fiscal policies. And maybe you also want to help immigrants come to Canada.
It's
doctors, right?
It's dancing
Like
that line between the blue Liberal and the red Tory.
Exactly.
And there are, I think, a lot of people in this country who fit into that.
I think that's
idea.
a very popular
position.
position.
I think there are a lot of people who would describe themselves as physically conservative but socially liberal.
Yes.
And that's that sweet spot in the center that wins over a lot of votes because it has mass appeal.
I suspect that's a great reason why the Liberals have been such a successful political party in Canada history.
They're the natural governing party.
Yeah. So, and I think that you outlined exactly why that is. They try to be fiscally conservative and socially liberal. And it's a tough dance.
Yeah, because you have to really dance that line. And I think it would be fair to say that under Trudeau, he tried to push it really left in both regards.
I think I would have to agree with that.
Too much that it kind of shed away a lot of that kind of center policy that they maybe once had. So be interesting. So I think maybe with that in mind, maybe let's talk about some potential assets and weaknesses of Mark Carney.
All right.
So some of these talking points, when I was doing my research, some of these talking points I got from some people who talked about assets and weaknesses when it comes to Carney. So I will say some of these are not in my own wording. These are not things that I've personally said. I'm kind of just showing you some points that some people have said, and you can make up your own mind. Some stuff I have added myself. So I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then
why does it say F Trump?
Doesn't say that anywhere. But so some of these points are mine, some of them aren't, or and I should say some are in my wording, some are not in my wording. So just this is not strictly from me and my perspective. This is a mixture of perspectives.
So you have no responsibility for the words you're about to utter.
Okay, so, and I'm going to use the word potential asset because it really depends on who you ask. So potential asset number one, he is not Trudeau, but he's still a Liberal.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party has been the natural governing party of Canada. You have to go all the way back to 1984, John Turner, to find the last Liberal Prime Minister to not win an election. Where he replaced Pierre Trudeau.
Wow.
So quite a long time, because in that time you had Jean Chrétien, he won in 93, 97, 2000. You had Paul Martin who won in 04. So, and then Trudeau in 15, 19, and 21. So quite a long
Quite
time.
a run they've had, yeah.
Quite a run. So number two, he's willing to criticize Trudeau. And this is kind of, and this kind of dances back to what we were saying of maybe Carney wants to push the party more into a center position in some regards. And potentially, like when we say maybe wants to push it, maybe he really does want to push it. And he's been intentionally quiet in some areas, like what you're saying with the immigration, because some of these could point to, okay, does he want to reduce immigration? Which that could anger a lot of the left leaning sides of the Liberal Party, but he tries to be quiet about it. Anyway, during the Liberal Party debates, he criticized Trudeau in some areas and has tried to get the point across that he is an outsider and that he will not, but he's also shown that he's not going to solely play defense for Trudeau's 9 years in office. He's trying to go on the attack and trying to right the ship, again, potentially steer things into the center.
Captain Carney.
Captain Carney, Captain Crunch. And some things that he did talk about in criticism of Trudeau was economic management. Carney identified issues of unsustainability in the economy, attributing them to the Trudeau administration's immigration policies and spending levels. He suggested that these measures artificially propped up the economy, masking underlying structural weakness, which I agree with.
Yeah, I would like you to read that again.
Carney identified some unsustainability in the economy, attributing them to the Trudeau administration's immigration policies and spending levels.
Right, spending levels, exactly.
He suggested that these measures artificially propped up the economy and masked underlying structural weaknesses.
That's a lot of fancy words there.
A lot of fancy words.
For inflation.
There's
like, get to the point.
A lot of syllables.
Yeah, a lot of syllables for stop spending so much money. And I think he makes a valid point. I think Trudeau I think Trudeau outspent all other prime ministers. You'd have to fact check that, of course.
Well, especially to double down on it.
He wasn't even shy about it. We are going to spend our
way. The budget will
out
balance
of
itself,
yeah.
And balancing a budget is cruel. All right.
Yeah.
The other thing was fiscal responsibility. This kind of doubles into what.
Yeah.
So while recognizing the necessity of certain expenditures, Carney emphasized the need for a growth agenda and proposed a new approach to federal spending focused on stronger fiscal management, which is a conservative thing. That is a conservative fundamental. Yeah. So for a liberal to talk about it, once again, that's center. That is not left-wing liberal stuff. That is center liberal or center right, depending on who you want to, on how you want to look at it.
Well, I think I figured it out. I know what's going on.
Kevin has figured it out.
Mark Carney is a right-wing mole.
Okay, it's interesting you say this. Do not quote me on this, but he was buddies at the time with Stephen Harper.
Yep.
And there were, please don't quote me on this. I think there were apparently grumblings, or I won't say grumblings. There were rumors that he might dabble into politics in the late 2000s, early 2010s for the Conservatives.
Yep.
So there's a connection.
The Liberals got so smart that they figured out the only way they were going to beat the Conservatives in the next election is by hiring a Conservative.
They played the trap card.
Oh yeah, that's genius.
To undermine
Pierre Poilievre.
So, anyway, number 3 potential. A skilled manager. His background with the Bank of Canada and England can give an impression that he is a qualified professional man who can handle the responsibilities and job of one of the most complex jobs in the world.
He's very connected. You can't take
And
that.
if you compare his previous experience, like his resume, with Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper, it's quite a large resume. Like Bank of Canada, England, United Nations, and he worked with Goldman Sachs as well, a banking firm. So this guy is he is a qualified person. He has worked in some of the biggest organizations in the world.
Yeah, he's ready.
He's ready. No, but he has. But again, if you look at Trudeau, like Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper's resume,
Yeah.
there's no competition.
Can't compare.
There's no competition there.
He's actually done real world stuff.
Yeah.
You know, hasn't just sat in a House of Commons for his whole career.
And
Not mentioning any names.
but and number 4, for a politician, he's a relatively good communicator because during his long career, he has frequently gone on podcasts and talk shows and has generally demonstrated a competent speaking ability. Like personally, my personal opinion, I think he's a better speaker than Justin Trudeau.
The boy?
I never. Okay, personally,
that's a very important question.
The one thing I like about, or like the one thing that always kind of annoyed me about Trudeau was that he would speak with a very huffed tone, very huff and puff.
Yeah.
Apparently that's a sign of lying, but anyway. So those are 4, depending on who you ask, potential assets that Mark Carney can bring as a leader and as a prime minister.
Yeah, I think the Liberals did a real good job putting him up on the auction block, and I think the Liberal base did a pretty good job seeing the advantages in going with a well-connected businessman who may have some right-wing talking points, but as long as he agreed to not impact the caring portion of the equation, right? Fiscal responsibility, but liberal
with
caring.
empathy.
Right. So I'm assuming that he agreed to take on the position, and under the conditions that he wouldn't mess with the caring side of the social contract side of the equation. And under those conditions, he probably agreed to take on the job, knowing that he was bringing right-wing ideals with him into the position, and they had to strike a bargain. There must have been some negotiations, and I bet you he has just agreed to let the Liberal Party handle the social portion of their policy platform, and he was going to handle the business portion of the Liberal policy platform. Now, to back that up, 2 things. In your description of him, you didn't mention any of his LGBTQ policies.
Right. I haven't seen or actually heard a lot about it outside of my notes.
And I'm using that to back up my opinion that he's just letting the Liberals handle that internally. He's going to focus more on getting the economy back on track. And if the Liberals are happy with that, well, then, the Liberals are happy with that. But even if you search for Carney's position on LGBTQ issues, you're not going to find a lot. He's been historically quiet,
very hush-hush on it. But
yeah, so I still say he's a right-wing conservative mole, and that the Liberals are just using him.
Undermine the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Honestly, I never thought about that until we read out these policies and are having this discussion. But if that is secretly what the Liberals done, that's a good play.
Jeez.
That undermines the Conservatives a ton.
Yep.
A ton.
Yep.
Anyways.
Sorry.
I don't mean to sound dismissive, but we are kind of running thin on time, and I wanted to talk about the weaknesses. And
these.
I have some notes here that are a little interesting. So
I know you're telling me to shut up so we can get to the end of this. I know. I can read through the lines. I got this.
Okay, so if you're going to talk about assets, you can talk about some weaknesses, and depending on who you ask, this might hold a lot of weight. It might hold none. Number 1, while he's not Trudeau, he was tied to Trudeau.
Was he ever?
He has a long track record of advising Trudeau and the administration behind the scenes, and given the unpopularity of Trudeau's economic policies, and the debate whether or not of Carney's involvement with the carbon tax, this can make this a bad liability on his track record if he wants to win over the support from swing voters / people dissatisfied with the Trudeau Liberals.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate out there. It's going to be tough to climb that.
Yeah, so he's going to have to really try and kind of clean out the barn. Because, again, maybe he was advising Trudeau, maybe he had some say on the carbon tax, but maybe it was very, very low. Like there's maybe Trudeau, because again, with this whole angle that maybe we're talking about, maybe he is a conservative mole. Maybe he was advising Justin Trudeau, but maybe out of, let's say, like if Trudeau had like 20 of his closest MPs with him, and maybe Carney was just kind of sitting in the chair next to me and said, okay, I want all your opinions. But maybe Carney was only like 5% of that opinion, or maybe he had 5% input. So again, he could have, so they could say, well, he advised Trudeau, but he could have, like I said, 5%, or it could be 95%. We just don't know.
Yeah.
But again, the more important thing, it's a bad liability on his track record. To say that you were tied with Trudeau in any way, doesn't matter if it was this close or like 20 car lengths away. That's not a good look.
The handcuffs were fur-lined. It's okay.
Yeah. So, number 2, his professional vibe, if you will, might make him presentable as snobby, aloof, or an elitist / globalist.
That's why I predicted that Chrystia Freeland was going to win the Liberal leadership, is because I thought they were going to see him as a stuffy old businessman.
Right.
Which is what he is.
And and this is what I talk about with the populist wave that I was talking about earlier in the episode. With the wave of the populist movements across North America and Europe for the last decade, Carney might fit the mold of a politician that people aren't wanting.
Yeah.
Pierre Poilievre embodies the opposite of this, with very populist-like rhetoric that has echoed what we've seen in places like the United States, tying identity politics and the emotional reactions of voters. Carney's position with very high-level organizations in the global world order is something that could work against him, especially with Poilievre trying to push himself as being a person of the common people. A lot of the pro-conservative commercials saying, he was an adopted child, and he was, from a family, comes from a very middle-class background, humble beginnings.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Carney's position. Sorry, I lost my way in the notes here. Sorry, yeah. So this could be used as a tool against Carney. Also, how Pierre could try and contrast this, he could frame Carney as a rich central banker who spent time outside of the very country he's now trying to lead. And Pierre could also try and frame the current government and Carney as elitist, know-it-all, self-important, pompous, big shots.
Pierre has his famous line that he loves to use. We'll be the gatekeepers. Is his favorite.
Carbon tax, Carney.
Protect you from the gatekeepers. Keep the gatekeepers away. What all has to be determined before the next election is which side of the gate is Carney on. If Carney's on the good side of the gate, then Pierre Poilievre's gatekeeper policy
goes
right out the window. But that's what remains to be seen, is how we view Carney. Is he on the other side of the gate, or is he on our side?
I think that will come with time in the next few months, depending on if we have an election in October or in spring, but certainly some time. And the debates too.
This is the other topic that we don't have time to talk about. What was whether or not we thought it was going to be a quick election or an October election.
I was always, this is just my own personal beliefs, but when Trudeau was still in power, I wanted an election flip-flapping away. I said, enough about this. He should step down. When the whole debates were, should he step down?
Some people were sharpening knives, so at least you only wanted an election.
I just wanted an election. Just let the people decide, because we're the ones who elect you in. But now, with everything that's gone on with the United States, with Trump, with the tariffs, I don't think it's a smart idea. I think we need to kind of give it a few months to really just kind of, if we have to wait till October, so be it. I'm not really as bothered now by it, because it's like we now have a new prime minister.
Well, this is excellent, because I think the exact opposite. I think we should have the election right away. So now we have something that we can try and hammer out, honestly, no time to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
This will be another topic, right?
When the federal election rolls around, we can talk about this.
That's true.
The last point that I really wanted to talk about, and you might not think this might not sound big at first glance, but I might change your mind a little bit.
All right.
He's not good at French, and he's not born in or culturally French. Let me explain.
Wow. It's huge.
While he was able to speak it fluently enough during the debates, he did have gaffes with regards with Hamas, but we won't go there. Not being able to speak French well enough in Canadian politics is a big no-no. It is a big no-no. And more importantly, the Liberals heavily rely on Quebec for their core voter base. If you look at an election map, that Montreal interior is always blood red, and they need to make sure that they maintain that because Quebec, the seat count fluctuates as the population goes, but they have over 70 seats. Wow. Them in Ontario are by far the most important, obviously, because they have the highest populations. And Quebec has always been a very liberal province, so it's important for the Liberals to get the Quebec vote. And historically, that's what's happened. And that also means historically, a lot of Liberal leaders have been from Quebec originally, or they have that Quebec heritage. And historically, when Liberals have not run French candidates, their results have been mixed to bad.
To poor,
to poor. And of course, Carney is not any of those. He's from Northwest Territories, and he's not culturally.
So the Bloc
French.
is going to do real well in this election.
And I think there's a fair critique that with this potential gaffe on his resume with the French, with his French speaking, and with the whole French debate thing with Hamas that I mentioned, coupled with the lack of his French background, this could push Quebec more to the Bloc Québécois in the federal election. And I'm going to bring up some numbers just to help illustrate my point if you're not fully convinced. So the last federal election that we had where we had a non-Quebec Liberal leader was in the 2011 federal election with Michael, and I'm probably going to...
Ignatieff.
Boom. Thank you. He was from Toronto. Yeah. And out of the 70, I believe they have 78 seats now, I believe. 75 to 78 seats currently. But out of that, the Liberals only won 34 seats, third place. And they only won 7 seats in Quebec. Sorry, that first seat counter was the amount of seats that they won overall. They won 7 in Quebec. Jack Layton's NDP dominated Quebec. And where is Layton from? Montreal.
Yeah. And he's a cool dude.
Jack Layton was pretty cool.
If you've seen him on TV, he was a
good speaker.
Yeah, he's a really cool guy.
2004 and 2006, Paul Martin from Toronto. In 2004, they won 135. 2006, they won 103. In both elections, they won 21 and 13 seats in Quebec. Bad. Like in 2004, the Bloc won 54 seats. And in 2006, they nearly lost to the Conservatives in seats in Quebec.
Wow.
That's bad performance if that's going to happen. 1984, 1988, John Turner placed second place in Quebec in both elections. He only won 17 seats in Quebec in 1984 and 12 in 1988. And Brian Mulroney, where was he from? Yeah. Quebec. And he and the Conservatives, now granted, this is before the Bloc Québécois was a party, so put that into perspective. But the Conservatives won 58 to the Liberals 17 and 63 to their 12.
Yeah.
So if you don't believe it now, it's kind of hard to really argue against otherwise. And to put into context, Pierre Trudeau, he's about as French as you can get. His heart is like the shape of the fleur-de-lis. He dominated Quebec. Out of all the elections that he was a part of as the Liberal leader, the Liberals never won fewer than 56 out of the 75 seats.
Nice.
So that's well over half of them. In 1953, Louis Saint Laurent won 66 out of 75 Quebec's of Quebec seats. He was Quebec
hardcore
through
Quebec,
and through.
Yeah.
So the last prime minister that wasn't born in Quebec that did well was Lester B. Pearson in 1965, and in some of the other elections that he was a part of. But I'm going to provide some context to that. Lester B. Pearson is generally recognized as one of the best prime ministers of all time. In a poll of post World War II Canadian prime ministers,
no way,
number 1. So Carney's going to have to be the best prime minister of all time if he wants to hope to have that Liberal vote. So we are unfortunately out of time. But that's my last point.
Let's end off with a prediction. Results next election, majority, minority. What's your call? Next election results. Who's got the majority? Who's got the minority? Who's what? And then we'll shut this down.
Liberal minority.
You stole my answer, you bugger. I'll go conservative minority then, just so we're different, and then we have.
Well, you predicted Freeland to.
Oh yeah, I'm always wrong.
Well, you predicted Freeland to be the Liberal leader, and I picked Mark Carney.
Yeah.
So, and I was right there, so maybe we'll see if we're right again.
All right.
But again, at heart, Melanie Jolie will always be number one.
Melanie is always
Queen Jolie.
my Queen Jolie.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. So again, I hope that kind of French connection kind of helps set things into perspective. So we talked about the proposals of Mark Carney, how he's secretly a conservative mole, maybe, and some potential assets and weaknesses of Mark Carney.
Bet on it.
So honestly, but I think in the absolute last conclusion, then we'll go. This election will be very interesting. I think this will be probably the most interesting election we've had, in a long time.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot riding on the table. So
because when Trudeau won in 2015, people were predicting that for a long time.
Yeah. Well,
and so
2015, was that marijuana? I forget.
Well, it was legalized in 2018, but that was a 2015 election proposal by.
That's And I just know that a lot of people thought at the time that the only reason he won was because he brought in marijuana. Yeah.
He brought the stoners out.
Yeah, but then he wouldn't leave, just like a typical stoner.
Nice one. So anyway, we are out of time. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the Roundtable Battlefield, talking about Mark Carney and him as being the new Liberal leader and our new Prime Minister. I don't know when he's getting sworn in, so maybe he's technically not the Prime Minister at the time we're taping this.
Yeah,
we're taping this 2 days after he was voted in. So, but thank you very much for watching, and from Colin and Kevin, we hope to see you again soon.
Take care.